In ancient times, could a servant in a wealthy household really rise up in status? Imagine you were born into a rich family, but not as a master. You were the child of a servant. Your mother was a maid in the mansion, of low status from the time you could remember. Her life was spent serving the masters early in the morning and returning to the firewood shed late at night. Always exhausted at 5 years old, you were finally allowed to help in the master's kitchen. Your mother told you, "Don't talk much, don't look around too much, and don't think too much in front of the masters." You nodded in agreement, but you were too young to fully understand the weight of those words that day. You carried a bowl of hot porridge to the young master. You walked on Stability. Spilling some on the ground, the young master frowned, kicked the bowl with his foot, and the scalding porridge splashed onto your feet. You fell to the ground in pain. "You dirtied my shoes," the young master said coldly, and then called for the steward. The steward didn't ask the reason and immediately ordered you to kneel on the stone step outside the door to apologize. Winter, as cold wind blew through your collar, and you shivered. Your knees rubbed dry, blood soaking into your trousers. You gritted your teeth and didn't dare to cry. Fearing it would anger the young master, your mother stood at the kitchen door. Her eyes red, but she ultimately didn't dare come over to help you. This was the first lesson you learned at 5 years old. In this mansion, servants had no dignity. At 10 years old, you had already adapted to life in the mansion. You knew which places to avoid, which words not to say, and which people not to provoke. You lived like a shadow, sweeping the courtyard every day and living with a submissive demeanor. Once, a kitchen cook gave you an extra steamed bun, which you secretly hid in your chest to take back to your mother, but just as you reached the doorway, you were stopped by a servant boy. He snatched the bun from you and sneered, "You filthy slave, how dare you steal from the masters?" You quickly knelt down and kowtowed, explaining that you hadn't stolen it, but he wouldn't listen and kicked you. You fell to the ground, and his cold voice echoed in your ears, "Go and take your punishment." You were brought before the steward and brutally whipped 5 times, your skin broken and flesh exposed. Your mother knelt down to plead for mercy, but she was also pushed to the ground at that moment. You finally understood that in this mansion, you are not a human being. You were just something that could be trampled on at will. At 15, you had grown taller and were more agile, so you were assigned to serve the main wife in the main house. Your mother happily told you that working in the main house was an opportunity to rise up in status. You thought so too, since at least you could eat your fill and not have to endure the wind and sun in the courtyard, but you soon found that this was just another abyss. The main wife was a temperamental woman who took out her frustrations on you whenever things didn't go her way. She would throw teacups, pull your hair, and stick a long needle into your handbag, then laugh coldly. "Look, does this blood look like pig's blood?" Once, after arguing with the master, still furious, she saw you coming in with tea and slapped you hard in the face, blaming you for bringing bad luck. You were hit so hard that you were dizzy and your cheek burned with pain, but you could only kneel down and kowtow, saying, "Slave deserves death." That night, you lay on the hard bed, tears silently streaming down your face. At 20, you finally became the personal servant of the young master. This was your closest chance to freedom, because you knew that if you showed loyalty, perhaps one day the young master would grant you a pardon and set you free. You served the young master with all your heart, preparing his clothes in advance every day, observing his moods, and not daring to make any mistakes. The young master was satisfied with you, and when he was drunk, he would pat your shoulder and say, "You're a clever dog." Your status gradually rose, and many servants in the mansion began to curry favor with you, and even the steward treated you with more respect. You began to enjoy the feeling of controlling others' fates. That day, a new maid came to the mansion. Looking at you with fear in her eyes, you remembered yourself from before, but you only sneered and said, "Remember, staying alive here is more important than anything else." And you ordered her to bring hot tea, but she trembled and spilled it on your hand. You frowned and slapped her to the ground, saying coldly, "Dirty slave girl, you can't even carry tea properly." You watched the tears in her eyes and felt a sense of pleasure. Finally, you are no longer the servant who was beaten and abused, but the one who could decide others' fates. One day, there were honored guests in the mansion, and the masters hosted a banquet to entertain them. During the meal, cups and goblets clinked as they toasted each other after several rounds of drinks. The guest, in high spirits, smiled and said to the young master, "Your servant here is quite capable and loyal." The young master laughed and casually replied, "He's just a dog." In his drunken state, he suddenly had an idea and said, "Crawl a few steps from me, boy." You froze. The laughter in the hall stopped, and the air seemed to solidify. You lowered your head, tightly clenching your fists. With sweat on your palms, you could hear your heartbeat pounding like someone knocking on your brain. You took a deep breath, trembled as you reached out your hand, and slowly knelt down. You crawled out, and the hall erupted in laughter. The young master picked up his goblet, drank it in one gulp, and waved satisfactorily. "Go away." You returned to your room, your legs giving out, and collapsed onto the floor. Tears streaming down uncontrollably. You suddenly realized that you would always be a dog in this life. Years later, the young master was sent to serve as an official in another region. You thought he would take you with him, but before he left, he only said, "The mansion needs hands, so you stay here." You stood there in shock, listening to his carriage fade into the distance. You lost your support and your status plummeted. You finally understood that your so-called loyalty was worth nothing. You continued to stay in the mansion, living day by day. Years passed, and you were already old. The mansion appointed a new steward, and you were assigned to clean the latrines, yet you dared not complain. At that moment, a familiar voice came. "Remember, Staying alive here is more important than anything else. You looked up sharply and saw the new steward. Was the maid you had slapped years ago. She looked down at you with a sneer and said, "You can't even clean the latrines properly. Shall I teach you how to crawl?" She slapped you across the face, causing severe pain on one side. You instinctively reached out to grab her hand to beg forgiveness, wanting to say that you were old and didn't deserve to be tortured anymore. But she only smiled slightly, slowly lifted her foot, and brutally stepped on your hand back. She knelt down and asked with a smile, "Does it hurt?" You tried to nod, but you didn't even have the strength to do that. "This is just the beginning," she sneered. "When you hit me, it was much worse than this." With another slap, your face hit the cold ground hard, and blood dripped from the corner of your mouth onto the bricks. Bright red and glaring, you once thought you had climbed to the top and could tread on others. That you were wrong at this moment. You finally understood that people could indeed stand tall. But from the moment of birth, it was destined that you would always be a kneeling servant.